Today on the show, we're going to be looking back at this little known cartoon from the early 2000s known as X-Men Evolution. We're going to be answering the question, does it still hold up? Before we get into this, I just want to say this video was almost entirely inspired by Billiam's Blank Was Weird series. Please go and check him out. His videos are great. I really love his Digimon series. Seriously, if you like anything from like the late 90s, early 2000s, his channel is perfect for you. Go and check him out. So let's go back. Way back to 1992. 1992 saw the release of the first successful X-Men animated series. There was an attempt prior to this one known as Pride of the X-Men, but we don't talk about Pride of the X-Men because...
Welcome her! Wait, she's not joining the X-Men, is she? She's just a kid!
Yeah, X-Men the animated series happened because Margaret Lowe, she was at the head of Pride of the X-Men, actually became the head of programming at the Fox Children's Network. So she saw this opportunity to see Pride of the X-Men into its fullest form. She commissioned 13 episodes of X-Men the animated series, and she had a visual style that was very reminiscent of Jim Lee's run. The show's promotion and success was only aided by the fact that Fox bought the rights to the X-Men in 1993. The series would basically do these loose adaptations of the X-Men's runs as well as its own original stories. Some of its more iconic runs were the Phoenix Saga, the Dark Phoenix Saga, and the very first episode was even inspired by aspects of Days of Future Past, although it wasn't a direct adaptation of Days of Future Past. The formula that was created in the show, if you really think about it, is the same formula that's used to adapt comics into live action movies to this day. Like, if you go back and watch the show and compare it to some movies that we have today, you're like, oh, yeah, that's the same formula. The show was so successful that when Marvel was about to go bankrupt and just cancel the show, Saban Entertainment stepped in and was like, nah man, we got you. And they created another 2 seasons. The show remained successful until its end in 1997. But that's not the show we're talking about today. So in the year 2000, Fox created the first live-action X-Men movie, and then Kids WB and Marvel Studios actually collaborate on a project together, and this project was titled X-Men Evolution. The concept for the show is basically the X-Men, but what if teens? The initial lineup of the show consisted of Xavier, Cyclops, Jean, Nightcrawler, who, by the way, this is the best he has ever been adapted to this day, Spike, who I believe was an original character for the show, Wolverine, Storm, Rogue, and Kitty Pryde. The bad guys, for the first season at least, were Mystique and her Brotherhood of Evil Mutants. This incarnation of the Brotherhood included Quicksilver, and I have to say, this version of Quicksilver was very influential on me. Like, very influential. And I only realized when I was making this video. As the series went on, other characters were introduced, like the New Mutants, Jubilee, Angel, and Scarlet Witch. Side note before we continue, please let me know if you've ever seen Evolution, the 90s cartoon, or any other comic book cartoon. I just really want to know. I'm very curious about what you guys have seen and what you might want me to talk about in the future. So the first season of the show basically spends its time laying the foundation for later seasons. We don't really get to go on many huge adventures in the first season, but I really like this because it led to some very strong seasons later on. So during the time of the first season, the majority of people actually don't even know mutants exist. This means mutants aren't really fighting for equality, they're just kind of learning how to use their powers, and most of the fighting goes on between mutants and other mutants. Meanwhile, Magneto and Mystique want mutants to rise above humans and basically want to expose themselves to humanity as if they are better than humans. I mean, I say Magneto and Mystique because Mystique was also there, but like, it's never explicitly stated that that's what Mystique wants. No one's ever really sure what Mystique wants. Even in the comics, she always just sort of turns up, fucks things up, and then leaves. Towards the end of the first season, there is a storyline where Magneto is introduced, he kidnaps a few mutants, and then he also just basically has Scott's brother tell him to get in the orb. So it turns out Magneto is basically gathering the Earth's most powerful mutants on an asteroid he's calling Sanctuary. And he's gonna gather these mutants and have them all work together to rise above humanity, and then humans will be mutant slaves. Xavier is like, Magneto, this is insane. And Magneto's like, I am a realist, Charles. You are an idealist. And this is what made me realize, if someone says I'm being a realist, that's just code for I'm being an arsehole and I know it, but oh well. Also, there's this moment where Scott and his brother turn up in matching outfits, and Magneto's like, look, he's wearing the outfit. That means he's on my side. Like, Did Magneto go out shopping specifically for outfits to mess with Charles? I need to know the logic behind this scene because I'm very, very curious. Magneto, explain. Also, he puts them in a machine that makes them thick. I approve. I have to say, the highlight of the first season isn't necessarily the missions or the adventures. It's more seeing characters like Kitty and Rogue grow to understand and love their powers. Kitty in particular was scared of the whole mutant thing to begin with, and Rogue really didn't want her powers to begin with, but as the series goes on, she comes to love her powers. In fact, my only gripe about Rogue in this incarnation of her is that I wish they got to a point where they could have introduced Captain Marvel so we could have just seen Rogue mess Captain Marvel up. Like, really, I just want to see Rogue mess up Carol. Something that I really appreciate about the show that I don't think many non-comic readers would appreciate is that the show is structured like a comic. It's not Monster of the Week, but it's also like not serialized in nature. It's more climax of the week, if that makes any sense. Like, each episode will have its own climax, and that climax will feed into an ongoing story. So it's this weird hybrid of the two that's very common in comic books, but not necessarily so common in TV shows. In the movies, it kind of sucked to be a mutant, and I really hated that, and it really put me off the movies. It made me quite angry, because being a mutant is amazing. Yes, you get these powers that can be used for fighting, but they can also just change the way you see the world and interact with the world. I mean, what is it like for Kitty basically not having any walls or floors? This is really subtly explored in X-Men Evolution, but it's there, and I love that. Yes, the world might not be the most accepting of mutants, but you can still have fun, and you can still love who you are. It does take its time to introduce characters. For example, Beast. He's initially introduced as Professor McCoy. It takes them 5 episodes for them to reveal that he's a mutant. It is implied that he knows about mutants in one episode when he helps Scott put back on his glasses, but it's not specifically confirmed until he eventually turns into Beast. And I will say, Beast is a great example of mutant pride in the show, because as much as his power sort of transforms him and it stopped him from being a teacher, which was something he loved to do, he embraces his new life as a mutant and comes to love teaching mutants specifically. So this is a bit of a sore point given what just happened in the comics. If you don't read the comics, good for you, but if you know, you know. Havoc and Scott's relationship in the show. So in the show, they spent most of their lives thinking each other was dead, and then when they finally get to find out that each other is alive, they embrace each other as brothers, and they quickly develop a brotherly relationship that's incredibly tender. They're very, very soft with each other, and characters being soft with each other, specifically male characters being soft with each other, isn't the most common thing. And so when it happens, I really do appreciate it. Lord of the Rings is another great example of male characters that are just soft with each other all the time. And this is just something I really appreciate because it's so human. Like, people have soft sides, people have hard sides, and you're gonna show these different sides to different people. But for Scott, he's gonna show his softer side to his brother because he loves his brother. Just like he loves Jean. Well, not just like he loves Jean. Different types of love, but you know what I mean. So I have to be honest about something. I had never seen the 4th season of the show prior to making this video. I knew it existed. I actually think I found out it existed shortly after starting this YouTube channel. I'm not sure if this season ever actually aired in the UK, because I know I watched the show. I just don't remember a single episode of season 4 airing in the UK. And I have to say, after watching the season for the first time, even though it's a shorter season, it really works. The reason I say it really works is because in the first 2 seasons of the show is quite light in tone. The world doesn't know about mutants, so everything's quite safe for these characters in terms of the outside world, so long as they are able to keep their secret, which they do pretty successfully. Then as season 3 begins, the rest of the world find out about mutants and they're not accepting of mutants. So the show sort of gives you this tonal whiplash, and you never really recover from this for the rest of season 3. And then season 4 basically has a single storyline dedicated to stopping Apocalypse. But because of this, they're able to work with this tonal whiplash, and you recover from it and come to appreciate the show's new tone. I'm not really sure what involvement with the show he had, but Grant Morrison seems to have known a lot about the show, so I believe he was either a writer on the show or some type of consultant. I don't know. He wrote the new X-Men run. That run is probably my favorite run of the X-Men next to New X-Men Academy X. But I think his involvement helped them refine this darker tone. Grant Morrison is known for his dark and weird storylines, like that's kind of his thing. Speaking of Grant Morrison though, something I'm really mad about, apparently he said that had the show continued, Emma Frost would have become a main character in the next season. Emma Frost is one of my top 3 favorite mutants of all time, maybe top 5, but like she is up there for me, and I'm like, we could have seen an adaptation of Emma Frost that would have possibly been good. What the hell? I'm so mad we didn't get to see that. In fact, apparently in the next season they were going to do a Phoenix Saga prequel set before the show began, and then do Dark Phoenix Saga after that, which is like, yes, if you're going to adapt the Phoenix Saga, you have to set it several years apart from the Dark Phoenix Saga. So if you want to do them back to back, that's how you do it. You do a few prequel episodes and then a few sequel episodes. I mean, when we talk about the Phoenix Force, we're talking about a cosmic entity that specifically bound itself to Jean Grey to save her life because it wanted to see the universe through her eyes. And it becomes corrupted over several years when bad things consistently happen to this girl, and it eventually takes over just because it is sick of feeling these negative things all the time. It doesn't start messing things up till Jean's life becomes messed up. So by having the Phoenix Saga be a prequel arc and the Dark Phoenix Saga be a sequel arc, that really shows me these showrunners understood the X-Men on a fundamental level, and I'm so mad we never got that final season. So mad. And that is something that I love about this show. The show isn't afraid to get in touch with what the X-Men is, the darker aspects and the lighter aspects. Like in the first season, Magneto was planning mass genocide and he was planning on mass brainwashing of the mutant population. I wouldn't call this a dark show, but I would say it's not afraid of the inherent darkness that comes with a more mature comic. It keeps its identity true to the X-Men, because that's what the X-Men does best. It balances out the dark and the light. If you've been watching me for a while, you know I have to talk about this. Visuals are a huge thing for me. People say to me all the time, Faust, why do you care so much about how characters dress? And I say, you can't fight crime if you ain't cute. Also, I'm a cosplayer, so I want to be able to dress up as these characters. So, in terms of costumes, I like Nightcrawler, I like Kitty, I like Wolverine. That's it. Don't like anyone else's costume. Maybe Storm. Yeah, I'll throw Storm in there as well. But everyone else is like, nah man, don't like any of them. I get what they were doing. They were trying to balance out what the comics were doing at the time with their own identity with what the movies were doing at the time. And it kind of worked, kind of. But the problem is this cartoon was following up from the original X-Men animated series. Those designs were the Jim Lee designs. You need something special to beat those. And finding a hybrid between 3 different mediums is not gonna let you beat those designs. It's just not. They needed to do something that would have established X-Men Evolution as its own identity. And I will say, in the very last episode, you actually look into the future and see the X-Men's future costumes, and they all suck, other than Scott's. Scott has like a great costume in the future. And I kind of wish, if they revive the show, we get to see him in that a lot. Please. But I think the strongest 2 designs in the series overall aren't even from members of the X-Men. It's Wanda and Quicksilver. Now, early 2000s teenage lesbian goth is one of my favorite aesthetics of all time. Don't at me. I just really appreciate that aesthetic. So that was gonna win. I love Rogue's aesthetic as well in the show, to be fair, like more goth, lesbian goth, yes. And Quicksilver, like I said earlier, was just very influential on me. I didn't realize how influential. I really like this design. Overall, I just think X-Men Evolution was just very, very special. I've been reading the comics since I was 3 years old, so I can't disconnect my perspective from the comics. So what I will say is, when the movies first started coming out, I was very, very young, but I felt very conflicted. I remember that because spiritually, they were nothing like the comics. And then this comes out, and it was spiritually identical to the comics. It had its own identity while being spiritually identical to the comics, and it created something I really loved, and still love, thankfully. I think the show was really helped by, during the show's run, Grant Morrison started writing the X-Men, and he reminded the world, mutants can be kind of weird, And this allowed the show to really experiment and go with new and weird ideas, something I really wish the movies did more of, and hopefully we'll see the MCU do that with the X-Men now they have the rights to the X-Men back. Overall, I have to give the show 4 out of 5 completely safe orbs, Scott getting the orb.
It's super effective!
Okay guys, that is it for today. So did you watch X-Men Evolution growing up? Please let me know in the comments down below. Also, what other comic book cartoons did you watch growing up? Please let me know in the comments down below. Also, don't forget to thumbs up, subscribe, and do all of my social links. Check out my Patreon if you want to support the show. Seriously, you get early access to all of my videos by donating just $1. But for now, my name is Faust, this has been Exploring Comics, and it is super effective.